Welcome back to day 29 of Hammerween, and indeed our final for this month, Black and White Excursion, and also our final expedition, pardon the pun, with Nigel Neal, as we've covered all five of his involvements with Hammer Studios this month, with the three Quatermass films, The Witches, and now this. So, 1957, based on his own play from the BBC called Creature, and directed by Val Guest, who did indeed make the first two Quatermass films for Hammer as well. So, as always, plot synopsis, and then we'll get into the review part. We meet John Rollison, a botanist, and his wife and assistant, who are studying, well, botany. That's what botanists are good for, in the Himalayas, and they're doing so at a monastery, um, given succor and leisure by the local lama. So the lama says you can stay here, and yep, you're not causing any of us harm nor offense. They're all very culturally sensitive. They bow to the Lama, etc. So, yeah, no problem whatsoever. Cue some rather cartoonish Americans arriving on scene, as led by Forrest Tucker as the rather oddly named Tom Friend. So, Friend, we quickly establish in a very Nigel Neal way. He always likes to put something up front and then elaborate later on the themes, but he always likes to put out, here's one of the themes straight away, rather than leave you kind of wondering what the thing's going to be about. We quickly establish that Peter Cushing is very much the man of science, as Rawlinson, and discovery and learning and enlightenment. Rawlinson, sorry, Friend is much more of the Carl Denham type from King Kong. He wants to come here and capture a Yeti. So in America, this film was called The Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas to give it a more salacious, monstrous title. And he, Friend, is a more salacious type who wants to take one of these abominable snowmen of the Himalayas and put it on display, capture one live if possible, but at least become famous as the man who's discovered one of the great creatures of mythos. This kind of appalls Rawlinson, Peter Cushing, but he does say, "Can I join the expedition anyway?" Because of course it would be for science, even if it's not his kind of expedition, and he would probably rather be doing it with some more enlightened people. He, of course, will take the chance if it's on hand to join in. The Lama gives him the blessing, but says there's nothing there, folks. There's absolutely nothing there. The Lama, in a very German accent, says that. But we suppose we can go into that in the review. Um, the expedition goes up the mountain, finds giant footprints in the snow, which gives, of course, evidence because it's far too big to be man-sized and whatnot. They find one creature, which one of them suggests is evidence of the Yeti, to which Rawlinson, Peter Cushing, points out you can find these in half the zoos of the world. These are common monkeys found up these mountains. Don't be daft. So again, we're not dealing with the most enlightened and scientific American party here. They don't even know the indigenous creatures of this mountain that they're exploring. They are purely here for, pardon the pun, the great white whale. They're not going to find a whale up a mountain, but you get the gist. They're here to find the treasure, essentially. They're not there because they have a great love of the Himalayas and of Yeti culture or the like, Tibetan culture. This is just an opportunity to make a buck. A Yeti is seen and spotted, and it's shot. They find it. They find a Yeti. One of the party is driven mad by the sight of it and runs back to the monastery, saying he's seen what man must never see, which alerts Peter Cushing's wife Helen and his partner Foxy to start a rescue party. But that's again a side plot that doesn't go too far, so I'm not going to get too much into it. One of the party of friends, Americans, also has a psychic proximity to the Yeti. even after it dies, and perhaps to other Yeti if there are indeed multiple ones in the local vicinity or the Yeti neighborhood, I guess, if they're in the same postcode, the same catchment area. And the Yeti are communicating to him, and they tell him to perhaps go for a walk. He does so and falls off a cliff. So are these Yeti malevolent indeed? Is friend actually right here? That these Yeti are, even if they're not mauling your face off, they're making you kill yourself, perhaps. Interesting. Now, at this point, I think I'll drop it here. I'm going to go into spoilers because to not talk spoilers means that I can't really discuss the themes of the film in their depth. So if you really don't want to know, then I'll see you tomorrow. And the film's generally recommended. But if you do want to know, then stick about. So if you've already seen it, let's keep going. Friend, it feels silly just saying friend all the time, but really, this film, you'll hear that 1,000 times. Friend, friend, where are you, friend? Very friendly bunch. Has a plan to trap a live Yeti by launching a steel net from above onto it, which appalls Rawlinson. As bait, Friend sends out one of his men with a rifle, which has only got blanks in it. And the reason he's doing that is we've already killed a Yeti. He wants a live specimen. When the next Yeti, so there are indeed multiple ones, we find that out quite quickly. When indeed the next one does arrive, Hmm, doesn't end well for the guy with the blanks. He takes a shot, realizes he's been set up, and he's dead. He's dead. Friend sees this as more evidence that he's correct. These are monsters. These are bestial creatures. Look, another one of my men dead. There's already one been driven mad. One's fallen off a cliff. One's now dead at the hands of this beast. Which Peter Cushing Rawlinson says. Look, one of them had altitude sickness, one of them just tripped and fell off a cliff, and one of them had a heart attack clearly because look at his face. He's in terror because you gave him a gun with no bullet in it, essentially. And he realized he was about to die because you've set it up that these things are monsters. You're the one that killed him. Look, there's not a scratch on him. He had a heart attack and died of sheer fear. So I mean, this is really the theme of the film, which we can go into, but who's the real monster here? So, um, Friend eventually comes round, if not to that way of thinking, at least to the idea that, look, so many of the party have died off here that we're going to need to call this off. The Yeti continued to use telepathy, which has been evolving throughout the film throughout the further they go up, and it can be written off in parts as being altitude sickness. But then a thought gets planted in Peter Cushing's head, and Friend's head, where they hear one of the dead party, the one who had a heart attack, calling for help. When Friend goes out to see what the ruckus is, he fires a gun off. So as is his wont as boorish American type in these films, and dies in a crushing avalanche that he caused by firing off his weapon. All through the film, it's been peppered through that be quiet around these parts because an avalanche, at the slightest crunch, if you make too much of a noise, if you yell too much in certain parts. So, Friend, because he kept the bullets back for himself, essentially has killed himself because in the avalanche. And if he had have given the other guy the bullets, yeah, they'd have a dead Yeti in their hands, but he would live. He would still be alive, old Friend. So Friend really is a victim of his own scheming and machinations and greed in a very treasure of the Sierra Madre fashion. Rawlinson has his reward at this point for being faithful to enlightenment, for not being uh, scared into mob mentality. Again, a Nigel Neal theme we can touch on. He's rewarded for not going in with the pack and running with them and saying just shoot them and we'll take the body back and make money from that. Rawlinson stays true the whole time that these creatures are not responsible for any death here. They're docile creatures, I'm sure of it. And the Yeti reveal themselves to him. They come and see him when he's the sole survivor of the expedition. And the Yeti take away their fallen comrade, the only evidence that any of the Yeti were actually there. So the one that they shot halfway through the film, Peter Cushing just watches on as they take that one away. He returns to the monastery and, well, he meets with the Lama again and says, "See, I told you, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, there's nothing up there, is there?" And Rawlinson Peter Cushing says, "What I was searching for does not exist." Roll credits. So, review. This is wonderful stuff. This is fantastic. The themes from Nigel Neal, which take a little while to reveal themselves, are all over it. The disdain for mob and pack mentality, for groupthink, for shoot first, ask questions later. The disdain for people who refuse to take at least a chance to step back and consider the scientific point of view. Rawlinson could easily be working with Quatermass. He's got that um, curious outsider point of view, but he's certainly not willing to just take an easy ride and go along with others for the sake of it, to make his life easier. He will stand up for what's right, what's decent. And again, he's rewarded for it by seeing the Yeti. So although he won't be able to prove it to the larger world, he comes away with the idea that these creatures, being much more docile and clearly massively intelligent with their psychic abilities, they were here before we were, and they'll probably be here after we're gone. And he posits that the creatures, the Yeti, will be waiting for mankind to destroy itself. Again, a very Nigel Neal theme that he'd continue with right through, the fourth Quatermass serial and even his original script for Halloween 3, that mankind is just inches away, or seconds away in the doomsday clock, if you will. So even this early, he's exploring those themes. The original teleplay that this was based on, which is sadly lost, was called The Creature, with the notion that, again, as I kind of said in the synopsis, who's the monster here? Is the monster the Yeti, who have done nothing wrong? They are only keeping themselves to themselves and haven't attacked anyone. Or is it the people who come with weapons to destroy their culture, not understanding it at all, thinking that they must be primitive types and basically just monkeys, etc., because they don't have shopping centers and cars? Does that make them creatures, or are we the creatures because we're the ones that are going around with such horrible aspirations to destroy and conquer nature and the earth? So very Nigel Neal themes, as indeed is the fantastical element of not just the existence of Yeti, but the psychic projections. Again, something you'd see in Quatermass in the Pit. So it's Nigel Neal working on these themes that he continued to come back to throughout. On the production itself, some wonderful cinematography for this, which is an Arthur Grant cinematography piece. And he wouldn't really become the in-house guy for Hammer for another 10 years. But interestingly, we've covered quite a lot from the mid 60s of his work. And yeah, you can see right away how talented he is. It's shot gorgeously. The sets by Bernard Robinson, who the master set designer of Hammer of the monastery, are stunning. They would later be used, God, nearly a decade later, for Fu Manchu with Christopher Lee, the first Fu Manchu, The Mask. Um, the director Val Guest took a crew to the French Pyrenees and they shot wonderful location footage of doubles dressed in the same costumes as the lead actors. So instead of just generic stand-in footage that you see in a million different films, this is set footage that he shot specifically, showing the well, it's not the actors, but showing the characters dressed exactly the same way as we see them in the film, up proper mountains in the Pyrenees, gives it a massive production value. Looks absolutely fantastic. And even when we do see them up, I mean, it's a hill in Wales, but up the mountains in Wales, obviously not as grand as the Pyrenees stuff, but because it's been the same characters that we've seen up the Pyrenees, it gives it all a sense of scale and scope that you wouldn't have gotten if they just used insert shots of generic mountainsides and then cut to a cave. But because we've seen characters who look like Friend, who look like Rawlinson with their distinctive costuming and whatnot, because we've seen that already, it just gives it a massive scale that just wouldn't have been possible otherwise. It was money well spent that to really bring you into the story. And then when you do see the caves and whatnot, they look fabulous too. Again, Bernard Robinson, just an absolute genius when it comes to sets. Think of all the wonderful sets that he designed for The Curse of Frankenstein and Dracula, all those great locations, and how many times he managed to make Bray Studios look like a million different places. Wonderful stuff. The performances. Peter Cushing is really good as John Rawlinson, but here's something unusual. We've criticized Brandon Levy in the Quatermass films a lot in this series. Forrest Tucker as Tom Friend is probably the best thing in this. And that's not to say that anyone else isn't particularly good or whatnot, but Forrest Tucker essentially gets to do something similar to Dunleavy in that he's boorish and he's heavy, but he plays it ridiculously well as a driven guy. It's just a matter of him being much better cast. He couldn't be Quatermass, but in this, he's not supposed to be. He's again supposed to be more like Carl Denham from King Kong. So it's like I've always said about Brendan Levy. It's not that he was a bad actor because he wasn't. He was a miscast actor. Forrest Tucker is a brilliantly cast actor for this part where he is playing the aggressive smuggler type, previously been a gun runner. You 100% buy it that he's out to make a payday. 100%. The Next year he would have a big hit with Anti-Mame in America, the highest grossing film of the year. So we're not talking about a washed up drunkard that, unfortunately Hammer did recruit quite a lot of because having to take any job that would pay them booze money, unfortunately, sadly for a lot of them. But no, he was at the peak of his powers, really. Not at the peak of his stardom, that was about 6 or 7 years earlier, but still, he would go into a major hit and then become a big TV star in the 60s. So yeah, good for Forrest Tucker. Good for him. He really holds his own against Peter Cushing. Which could you have said that if Brian Dunleavy shared the screen with him? I don't think so. There are loads of side characters. Richard Wattis is Peter Cushing's assistant, Foxy. He's fine. You'll know him as the kind of officious governor type from the ministry in the St. Trinian's films. Uh, Maureen Cannell's Peter Cushing's wife. She's quite interesting. She's doing cartography and things in it. So again, it's Nigel Neal giving women parts of science that they wouldn't always get in this kind of film in the 50s, certainly. She's not just the wife, she's a scientist too. Nigel Neal always liked to do that because he had such a great reverence for his own wife and what she'd been through, who would go on to be a best-selling author herself. And then there's some odd casting. Robert Brown would go on to be M, the second M in the Bond series. So between Bernard Lee and Judi Dench, you have Robert Brown for a few movies. He's an American in it, which interesting choice. Doesn't quite work. But Arnold Marley plays the llama. It's odd because he's clearly just a German guy dressed up in Asian garb. But I have to applaud it. First of all, I played the part in the TV version. So did Peter Cushing. He's reprising his role here. And what I do appreciate is that they didn't do yellow face. And by that, obviously, it's a black and white film, so you wouldn't have seen yellow anyway, but you know what I mean? They don't have the Fu Manchu slanty eyes thing going on. None of that. He just looks like he did in real life, just a little German man. And it's his acting that convinces you, which is how colorblind casting should be done, isn't it? I mean, obviously, ideally, you would have an Asian actor play the parts, but we're talking about 50s casting, having to find an Asian actor in his mid 50s, casting agency, finding someone in the union to fit that description at the time. Hmm. I mean, even for 20 years, Burt Kwok would be the only type they would even consider for that kind of role. Yeah, so I mean, the film in general just it rolls by a clip as a good adventure film until the last third, where it becomes a much more moralistic tale. The TV version was much more moralistic from what we know of the script, but Val Guest decided we need to take some of that out to make it more cinematic. It doesn't work as an adventure thing. Similarly, the title of the creature had to be changed to something more salacious for audiences. So, hence the Abominable Snowman or the Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas. But it still works because we do have Nigel Neal writing it, so it's not a compromised vision. So we do still have these great moments where Rawlinson stands up for science and stands up for these creatures that we just don't understand them. That doesn't make them evil. They've got something beyond our comprehension. We should be trying to learn from them, not kill them. So the confrontation between science and savagery really is the crux of the film. It might not be the most interesting thing for a general public and for a film poster to sell that. So you do want to go with creatures and blood and mayhem and but really Nigel Neal comes through in the authorship massively in terms of his belief in mankind and lack of therefore in most cases. So yeah, this is wonderful recommended stuff, which I mean it's only an hour and 25 minutes. Believe me, it's brilliant and would go on quite a bit of a few years later to inspire Doctor Who with their own Abominable Snowman, which the first episode of which has quite a lot of inspiration from this, but oh, the Yeti and that are a bit different. They're robots. Anyway, I've waffled on. These are getting longer again. I'm glad the month's nearly over because these would be 5 hour lectures if we kept to go until Christmas. Tune in tomorrow, won't you? As we will be discussing the penultimate day of Hammerween. I can't believe it. The penultimate day. We will be discussing, well, the month started with the first real Hammer horror, the Quatermass Experiment. Tomorrow, we're going to do the last of the original Hammer horrors, To the Devil a Daughter. But then on Wednesday, no, excuse me, Thursday, you never know I'm banking these at the weekend, would you? We will talk about my favorite Hammer horror, which I haven't mentioned yet, but I'm sure a good few of you can guess anyway. I'm sure of it. Anyways, I'll see you tomorrow for To the Devil a Daughter. Until then, don't be like this guy and don't have nightmares.